In 1898, a 17-year-old boy sat in a cramped workshop in Milan, surrounded by bicycle parts and the smell of machine oil. His father, one of the most celebrated furniture designers in Europe, had enrolled him at the prestigious Brera Academy to study art. The boy lasted about 5 minutes. While his classmates learned to paint and sculpt, he was here, in the back rooms of a bicycle manufacturer called Prignetti and Stucci, teaching himself how engines worked. His family had produced painters, sculptors, and architects for generations. Everyone expected him to carry on that tradition. But this boy had different ideas. He looked at engines the way his father looked at carved mahogany. He saw beauty in pistons and poetry in gear ratios, and he was convinced, with the kind of certainty only a teenager can have, that he could build machines more beautiful than anything his artistic family had ever created. 3 decades later, his racing cars would win over 2,000 victories in just 5 years. His luxury automobiles would cost more than mansions, and his name would become synonymous with automotive perfection. That boy was Ettore Bugatti. This is that story. The Bugatti family of Milan was not your typical bunch. To understand Ettore, you first have to understand the almost absurd concentration of artistic talent that surrounded him from birth. His father, Carlo Bugatti, designed Art Nouveau furniture so elaborate, so ornate, so utterly impractical that pieces now sit in museums around the world. Carlo's work featured inlaid copper, hand-painted vellum, and intricate patterns that took months to complete. He also designed jewelry, silverware, and musical instruments. The man couldn't look at an object without wanting to make it beautiful. Ettore's younger brother, Rembrandt, became one of the most celebrated animal sculptors of the early 20th century. His bronze panthers, elephants, and horses commanded prices that rival small houses. The dancing elephant that would later adorn the hood of every Bugatti Royale was designed by Rembrandt. It wasn't enough for the Bugattis to build cars. The hood ornament had to be museum-quality sculpture. Even the extended family was ridiculous. Ettore's aunt, Luigia Bugatti, married Giovanni Segantini, one of Italy's most important painters. Family dinners must have been insufferable for anyone who couldn't hold forth on brushwork or bronze casting techniques. So when young Ettore showed zero interest in traditional art, his family was, let's say, concerned. Carlo had dreams of his firstborn son continuing the artistic dynasty. Instead, the boy wanted to play with engines. But they failed to see what the teenager understood instinctively. Machines were art, engineering was sculpture, and the automobile, still in its infancy in the 1890s, was the most exciting canvas in the world. At 17, Ettore talked his way into an unpaid apprenticeship at Prignetti and Stucci, a Milan company that had recently started manufacturing motorized tricycles. He had no formal engineering training, he had no credentials. What he had was an almost supernatural ability to understand how mechanical things worked just by looking at them. The apprenticeship was unpaid, which suited Ettore fine. He wasn't there for money, he was there to learn. And learn he did, absorbing everything about engines, transmissions, and the nascent art of automobile construction. Within months, he was proposing improvements to the company's designs. Within a year, he was essentially designing vehicles himself. By 19, he had designed his first automobile. It won a prize at an industrial exhibition in Milan. A teenager with no formal training had created something that professional engineers praised. The automotive world started paying attention. Within 2 years, he had designed his first automobile. It won a prize at an industrial exhibition in Milan. He was 19 years old. The early 1900s were the Wild West of automotive engineering. Nobody really knew what a car was supposed to look like or how it was supposed to work. There were no established rules, no standard practices, no right way to do anything. It was a time when a talented individual with vision could reshape an entire industry. Ettore was determined to be that individual. He bounced from company to company, learning everything he could while quietly believing he could do it better than everyone else. He worked for De Dietrich, a French company where he developed cars that were identified as De Dietrich, license Bugatti. It was here that Ettore introduced one of his early innovations, a lower, closer driving position that improved both maneuverability and aerodynamics. It seems obvious now, but in 1902, most cars had drivers perched high above the chassis, like they were sitting on a horse-drawn carriage. Ettore recognized that the automobile was something new, requiring new thinking. He partnered briefly with Emile Matisse to produce vehicles under the name Matisse Hermes, Licence Bugatti. The partnership lasted only 2 years before the men went their separate ways. Ettore was not good at partnerships. He was not good at compromise. He had his vision and he would pursue it alone if necessary. He worked for Deutz, a German company based in Cologne, where he served as production director and designed the Type 8 and Type 9 automobiles. While employed at Deutz, he also secretly developed the Type 10 as a private project. This was the car that would prove his concept and provide the foundation for his own company. He was already planning his escape. At each stop, Ettore absorbed knowledge like a sponge, and at each stop, he grew more convinced that he needed to do this on his own terms. In 1909, everything changed. Ettore had scraped together enough money to rent a decommissioned dye works in Molsheim, a small town in the Alsace region. At the time, Alsace was part of the German Empire, though it would become French territory after World War I. The factory was modest, a converted industrial building in a quiet town surrounded by vineyards. The ambitions were not modest at all. Ettore Bugatti didn't just want to build cars. He wanted to build rolling works of art that happened to go very, very fast. He wanted to combine his family's obsession with beauty with his own obsession with mechanical perfection. Every component, every bolt, every hidden bracket would be designed with the same care his father put into furniture destined for palaces. To fund his equipment purchases, Ettore sold design licenses to other manufacturers. Most notably, Peugeot built around 3,000 units of his Bébé small car between 1913 and 1916. The irony of a perfectionist making money by letting others mass-produce his designs was not lost on anyone. But the real work was happening in Molsheim. Ettore was building his first true Bugatti racing cars, and here's where his personality becomes central to the story. Ettore Bugatti was an absolute perfectionist, the kind of person who would reject a finished part because the screws weren't aligned correctly, the kind of person who would spend extra money on components that no customer would ever see, simply because he knew they were there. The kind of person who believed that excellence in invisible details somehow radiated outward into the visible whole. He was also, to put it diplomatically, not great at customer service. When a customer once complained that his Bugatti was difficult to start on cold mornings, Ettore reportedly responded, "Sir, if you can afford a Type 35, you can surely afford a heated garage." When another customer complained about the brakes, Ettore replied, "I make my cars to go, not to stop." The man had opinions, strong opinions, and he was not interested in feedback. This attitude would have destroyed most businesses, but Ettore Bugatti was not running most businesses. He was building the fastest, most beautiful racing machines the world had ever seen. And when you're winning races, people tend to forgive your personality. World War I interrupted everything. Ettore was displaced from Molsheim and spent the war years in Milan and Paris, designing aircraft engines and dreaming of his return. As soon as the armistice was signed, he raced back to his factory. Less than 4 months after the Treaty of Versailles transferred Alsace from Germany to France, Bugatti had secured a stand at the Paris Motor Show. The 1920s were about to become the greatest decade in Bugatti history. In 1924, Bugatti unveiled the Type 35 at the French Grand Prix in Lyon. 5 cars entered the race, each one a masterpiece of engineering and design. Every single one failed to finish. The problem wasn't the cars, the problem was the tyres. They hadn't been properly vulcanized by the supplier, and they fell apart at high speed. It was a humiliating debut for what was supposed to be Bugatti's breakthrough racing machine. Any normal company would have retreated, regrouped, maybe fired someone in quality control. Bugatti was not a normal company. Ettore fixed the tyre problem and went right back to racing. What happened next defies belief. The Type 35 became the most dominant racing machine the world had ever seen. We're not talking about winning a few races here and there. We're not talking about having a good season. We're talking about complete and utter annihilation of everything and everyone that dared to compete. At its peak, the Type 35 averaged 14 race wins per week. That's not a typo. 14 victories every single week. Between 1925 and 1929, Bugatti won the Targa Florio, one of the most grueling and dangerous road races on Earth, 5 consecutive years. The course wound through the mountains of Sicily, with cliff edges, hairpin turns, and surfaces that range from paved to barely passable. The Type 35 won the first Monaco Grand Prix ever held. It won the 1926 Grand Prix World Championship. By the end of the decade, Bugatti racing cars had accumulated over 2,000 victories. 2,000. The car itself was a revelation. It weighed only about 750 kilograms, roughly 1,650 pounds. The supercharged version produced around 140 horsepower. Those numbers might not sound impressive today, but in the 1920s they were extraordinary. More importantly, the Type 35 was light, nimble, and beautifully balanced. It handled better than anything else on the track. The engineering innovations were numerous. Ettore used a crankshaft supported by 2 roller bearings and 3 ball bearings, allowing the engine to rev to 6,000 RPM, an almost unheard of figure at the time. The cast aluminum wheels were integral with the brake drums, reducing unsprung weight and improving handling. The front axle was hollow to save weight while maintaining strength. Even the springs passed through the front axle rather than being bolted underneath, lowering the center of gravity. These were the kinds of details that Ettore obsessed over. Each innovation, taken individually, provided a small advantage. Together they created a car that was simply better than everything else. And it looked like nothing else on Earth. The signature horseshoe-shaped radiator, which would become Bugatti's trademark. The sleek, tapered body. The cast aluminum wheels that were a Bugatti innovation. Every line served a purpose, but every line was also beautiful. Ettore's artistic heritage showed in every curve. The Type 35 was built in several variants, each optimized for different racing conditions. The original Type 35 used a 2.0-litre engine. The Type 35T, nicknamed Targa, was developed specifically for the Targa Florio with a larger 2.3-litre engine. The Type 35C added a supercharger, boosting power significantly. The Type 35B combined the larger engine with the supercharger for maximum performance. Bugatti built approximately 340 Type 35s in various configurations. Compared to the mass production of Ford or General Motors, this was practically handcrafted. Each car received individual attention. Each car left the factory as close to perfect as Ettore could make it. The Type 35 attracted drivers who would become legends. Louis Chiron, Tazio Nuvolari, Alberto Divo. These were the rock stars of their era, and they all wanted to drive Bugattis. Even female racing drivers chose the Type 35. Helene Nice, known as the Bugatti Queen, raced Type 35s throughout Europe. Eliska Junkova, a Czech driver, led the entire field at the 1928 Targa Florio for most of the race, before mechanical trouble dropped her to 5th. A woman leading the most brutal road race in Europe in 1928. That's how good the car was. In 1929, Louis Chiron delivered perhaps the most satisfying victory in Bugatti history. The Grand Prix of Nations was held at the newly opened Nürburgring in Germany. The German automotive industry, which had poured enormous resources into racing, expected a home victory. The crowd was massive and partisan. Chiron, driving a Type 35C, won by 12 minutes. 12 minutes. His teammate Georges Philippe finished second, also in a Type 35C. The crowd, which had come expecting German triumph, watched in stunned silence as 2 French cars with an Italian name dominated their national circuit. Ettore famously called the Type 35 the founding father of a family of pure-blooded racehorses from Molsheim. For once, his self-assessment was not an exaggeration. But racing glory wasn't enough for Ettore Bugatti. Winning 2,000 races was merely proof of concept. Now he wanted to build the ultimate luxury car, something that would make Rolls-Royce look like a Ford, something that European royalty would line up to purchase, something that would cement his legacy as the greatest automotive mind who ever lived. In 1927, he unveiled the Type 41. It would become known as the Royale, and this is where the story starts to go wrong. The Royale was the product of Ettore's grandest ambitions. He had conquered racing. Now he wanted to conquer luxury. He looked at the existing prestige cars of the era, the Rolls-Royces and Hispano-Suizas and Isotta Frascinis, and he decided they weren't good enough. He would build something that made them all look ordinary. The Royale was preposterous in the best possible way. It stretched 21 feet long. To put that in perspective, That's longer than most modern pickup trucks. A Cadillac Escalade is about 17 feet long. The Royale exceeded it by 4 feet. You could park a motorcycle in the space between a Royale's front and rear wheels. It weighed 7,000 pounds. The chassis alone weighed nearly 3,000 pounds before any body was attached. The engine displaced 12.7 litres and produced 300 horsepower, which was twice as much as a contemporary Rolls-Royce Phantom. The engine alone was a monument to excess. It measured over 4 feet long and 3 feet high. The crankshaft rode on 9 main bearings. Each cylinder displaced more than the entire engine of Bugatti's own Type 40 touring car. When the Royal project eventually failed, Ettore repurposed the engines for high-speed railway cars. An engine designed for kings ended up hauling French commuters. The wheels were 24 inches in diameter, made from cast aluminum. The brakes were cable-operated drums because Ettore still believed that "I make my cars to go, not to stop." The suspension used enormous leaf springs that could support the weight of what was essentially a rolling palace. Ettore planned to build 25 of these monuments to excess and sell them exclusively to royalty. Kings, queens, emperors, maybe the occasional tycoon who had married into nobility. The kind of people who could afford a car that cost more than most people's lifetime earnings. There was just one small problem. The Royale debuted in 1929. You might recognize that year. It was the year the global economy collapsed. The Great Depression didn't care about Ettore Bugatti's dreams. European royalty suddenly had more pressing concerns than buying 21-foot automobiles. Revolutions were brewing. Fortunes were evaporating. The world order that had sustained the market for ultimate luxury vehicles was crumbling. The King of Spain had ordered a Royale. By the time the car was ready for delivery, he had been deposed in a civil war and was living in exile. He was no longer in the market for luxury vehicles. In the end, Bugatti built only 6 Royales. He sold exactly 3 of them to external customers. The remaining 3 stayed with the Bugatti family for years, eventually finding buyers only after Ettore's death. The irony was almost too perfect. Ettore kept the unsold engines and installed them in high-speed railcars for the French National Railway. 79 railcars were built using Bugatti engines, and they remained in service until the late 1950s. The engines that were supposed to transport kings now hauled ordinary passengers between French cities. The project that was meant to crown Ettore's legacy became one of his most notable failures. Although, in a final twist, those 6 surviving Royals are now worth over $50 million each. It just took about 100 years for the market to catch up with Ettore's ambitions. But Ettore had something more important than the Royale. He had his son. If you're enjoying this story, hit subscribe. I cover the rise and fall of legendary companies every week. Now, let's talk about the man who was supposed to inherit everything. John Bugatti was born on January 15, 1909, the exact same year his father founded the company. It was as if destiny had aligned the two from the very beginning. From childhood, John practically lived in the Molsheim factory. While other kids played with toys, Gene watched mechanics assemble racing cars. While other teenagers worried about school, Gene was sketching automobile designs. By his early 20s, he was designing vehicles himself, and he was good, really good, maybe even better than his father. But Gene was also his own man. He had inherited his father's perfectionism, but he had also developed his own ideas about where automotive design should go. This led to conflicts that would define their relationship. Ettore despised independent front suspension. He believed that the solid front axle, which Bugatti had used for decades, was the purest expression of automotive engineering. Independent suspension, where each wheel moves separately, was a compromise, a concession to comfort over performance. In Ettore's mind, it was practically a betrayal. Jean disagreed. He recognized that times were changing. Competitors were adopting independent suspension and gaining advantages. Clinging to tradition for its own sake was not engineering. It was stubbornness. So Jean did something remarkable. He secretly built a prototype with independent front suspension, using parallel trailing arms and torsion bars. To keep his father from discovering the project, he gave it the code name Crème de Menthe. The deception didn't last. When Ettore eventually discovered what his son had done, he was furious. He declared that the Crème de Menthe prototype was no longer a Bugatti and banned Jean from using the design in production vehicles. The prototype was photographed once and then essentially erased from company history. It was the eternal struggle between tradition and innovation, played out in an automobile factory in rural France. A father who believed he had perfected the art of building cars. A son who saw that perfection was not a destination, but a moving target. Despite these conflicts, Jean's design talent was undeniable. At just 21 years old, he designed the body of the Royal Esders Roadster. The car was commissioned by Armand Esders, a French clothing manufacturer who specified that it should have no headlights because he never drove at night. Jean created a dramatic two-seater open body with sweeping fenders that somehow made the massive Royal look elegant rather than ridiculous. But Jean's masterpiece would come later. At 27, he designed the Type 57 SC Atlantic. The Atlantic might be the most beautiful car ever built. It represented everything Jean had learned about design, engineering, and the marriage of form and function. Where his father often prioritized mechanical perfection over aesthetics, Jean understood that a truly great car had to be both. The Atlantic featured flowing curves that seemed to defy the sheet metal they were made from. The body tapered from a wide front to a narrow rear, like a teardrop frozen in motion. The fenders swept back in graceful arcs that followed the wheels. The windshield split into two angled panes, creating a sharp V that added to the car's sense of forward motion even when standing still. And then there was the fin. A riveted dorsal fin ran from the hood, over the roof, and down to the tail, creating a visual spine that made the car instantly recognizable from any angle. No other car had anything like it. No other car would ever replicate it successfully. That dorsal fin was not just a design choice. It was a solution to a manufacturing problem. The Atlantic's body was formed from a lightweight aluminum-magnesium alloy called electron. The material was incredibly light, which helped performance, but it was also volatile. It couldn't be welded without risk of catching fire. Jean could have chosen a different material. He could have compromised on weight for the sake of easier manufacturing. Instead, he found another way. He created raised seams where the body panels overlapped, held together by external rivets. The rivets ran down the centerline of the car like a spine, turning a limitation into a signature. A flaw became the car's most distinctive feature. It was pure Jean Bugatti, refused to compromise, find another way, make the solution more beautiful than the problem. Only 4 Atlantics were ever built. Today, each one is worth tens of millions of dollars. Ralph Lauren owns one, painted black, which has won Best of Show at Pebble Beach. Another resides in a French museum. A third belongs to a private collector who rarely allows it to be seen. The fourth, Jean's personal car, which he called La Voiture Noire, vanished during World War II and has never been found. We'll come back to that mystery later. By 1936, Ettore was tired. He was 55 years old. Factory strikes had worn him down, leaving him bitter about the workers he had employed for decades. He retreated to his apartment in Paris and handed control of the company to his 27-year-old son. Jean was ready. He had the design talent, the engineering knowledge, and the racing pedigree to carry Bugatti into the future. Under his leadership, Bugatti won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1937. Jean-Pierre Wimille and Robert Benoit drove a Type 57G tank to victory in wet, treacherous conditions. The Le Mans victory was particularly meaningful because it came against long odds. The Type 57G tank was essentially a streamlined version of the Type 57 road car, competing against purpose-built racing machines. The car had a distinctive teardrop shape, with enclosed wheels and a long, flowing tail designed to minimize air resistance. Jean had overseen its development personally. The race itself was brutal. Rain fell for much of the event, turning the circuit into a treacherous mess of standing water and reduced visibility. Other cars crashed, other teams retired, but the Bugatti kept going, its drivers carefully managing the conditions, nursing the car through the worst of it. When Wimille crossed the finish line after 24 hours of racing, it was validation of everything Jean had worked for. He had taken a company that his father had built on racing glory and proven that the glory could continue. 2 years later, in 1939, Bugatti won Le Mans again. This time, Wimille was partnered with Pierre Veyron, whose surname would later grace the most famous modern Bugatti hypercar. The victory was particularly sweet because Bugatti had entered the race with just one car and minimal resources. The factory was struggling financially. The political situation in Europe was deteriorating rapidly. War was clearly coming, but still, they won. It was the last Le Mans victory for the original Bugatti company. It was also one of the last great moments before everything fell apart. The future looked bright. Jean had the talent. He had the victories. He had his father's blessing. The Bugatti dynasty was secure. Then came August 11th, 1939. The Type 57 tank that had just won Le Mans was back at the Molsheim factory. Jean wanted to test the car on the nearby roads, perhaps to gather data for future improvements. It was a Friday evening, around 10 o'clock. The stretch of highway between Molsheim and Strasbourg had been closed for the test. Guards were posted at each end of the course to prevent anyone from entering. Everything was controlled. Everything was safe. Jean made several runs with his racing director, Robert Automotive, et Monsieur Bourbard in the passenger seat. The car was performing beautifully. The engine sang. The handling was precise. Everything felt right. Then Jean asked to do one final run alone. Automotive stepped out of the car. Jean drove off into the gathering darkness. What happened next changed everything. Somehow, a cyclist made his way onto the closed road near the village of Duppigheim. Some accounts say he was drunk. Others say he simply wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. The guards at either end of the course hadn't seen him. He had somehow slipped through. Jean was travelling at high speed when the cyclist appeared in front of him. He had a split second to react. He could hit the cyclist, almost certainly killing the man, or he could swerve. Jean swerved. The Type 57 tank left the road and slammed into a tree. Jean Bugatti was thrown from the vehicle. Automotive and a mechanic named Jules heard the crash and raced to the scene in another car. They found Jean barely alive. They placed him in the back seat and rushed him to the hospital. It was too late. Jean Bugatti died that night. He was 30 years old. According to Ettore's daughter, Lebe, the cyclist was so consumed by guilt that he committed suicide 3 years later. Whether that's true, we don't know. What we do know is that Jean's death destroyed his father in ways that would never heal. Ettore Bugatti had built an empire, but he had built it around a single successor. Jean was not just his son. Jean was his heir, his protégé, his continuation. The company had no succession plan beyond Jean. There was no one else who understood both the engineering and the artistry. There was no one else who could carry the Bugatti name into the future. With Jean gone, the torch had no one to hold it. Ettore retreated into himself. Those who knew him said something fundamental had broken. The fire that had driven him for 4 decades, the relentless perfectionism, the impossible standards, all of it seemed to flicker. He continued to work, designing new cars on paper, planning for a future that would never come. But the joy was gone. The man who had once declared, "Nothing is too beautiful, nothing is too expensive," now moved through his days like a ghost. He refused to let anyone touch Jean's personal car, the grey Type 57C that Jean had driven to the test site on the night he died. The car where Jean had made his final journey to the hospital. Ettore kept it at the factory, untouched, a shrine to his lost son. Even when his son-in-law, the Count de Boigne, offered to buy the car, Ettore refused. Some things were not for sale, some things were sacred. Less than a month after Jean's death, World War II began. On September 1st, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. 2 days later, France and Britain declared war on Germany. The world was descending into the chaos that would consume everything. In 1941, facing the prospect of his company being sold at judicial auction, Ettore made a devastating decision. He voluntarily sold the factory to prevent it from falling into Nazi hands under even worse terms. The price was 150 million francs. That was half of what the company was worth. Ettore took the deal because the alternative was losing everything for nothing. The factory that had produced 2,000 racing victories, the workshops where the Royale had been built, the grounds where Jean had learned to love automobiles, all of it was gone. During the war, Ettore retreated to his Paris office and designed new cars that would never be built. He planned a new factory at Les Valois, a suburb of Paris. He sketched the Type 73, a road car that was supposed to revive the company after the war. He kept working because working was all he knew how to do. But the worst was yet to come. After the liberation of France, a wave of retribution swept the country. Anyone who had cooperated with the German occupation in any way was suspect. Collaborators were publicly shamed, imprisoned, or worse. The French people were angry, and they wanted someone to blame. Ettore Bugatti, the Italian-born industrialist who had sold his factory during the occupation, became a target. The charges were collaboration with the enemy. The evidence was thin at best. Ettore had sold his factory to prevent it from being seized, not to help the Germans. He had spent the war in Paris, designing cars in his office, not working for the occupiers. But in the feverish atmosphere of post-liberation France, nuance was in short supply. His property was seized. Everything he owned, everything he had built over 40 years, was taken from him. The man who had dedicated his life to making France famous for automotive excellence was treated like a traitor. On June 20th, 1947, a French court finally acquitted Ettore Bugatti of all charges. The collaboration accusations were baseless. His property was ordered restored. It was a complete vindication. The man who had given so much to French motorsport and industry was innocent. Ettore never knew. Months earlier, he had suffered a stroke. He lay in a coma at the American hospital in Neuilly, a suburb of Paris, completely unaware of the outside world. The legal victory that restored his name and his property never reached him. On August 21st, 1947, Ettore Arco Isidoro Bugatti died. He was 65 years old. He was buried in the family plot at the municipal cemetery in Dorlisheim, near the factory in Molsheim, where he had spent the best years of his life. The man who had won 2,000 races, who had built cars for kings, who had raised automobile engineering to the level of art, died without knowing that his name had been cleared. Just 2 months after his vindication, he was gone. The Bugatti company struggled on for a few more years under Ettore's other son, Roland. They attempted to maintain the existing cars, providing service for the aging fleet of pre-war Bugattis. They produced engines for the French military. They tried to keep the dream alive. In the mid-1950s, they attempted a genuine comeback. The Type 251 was supposed to be a new Grand Prix racing car, designed with help from Gioacchino Colombo, one of Ferrari's legendary engineers. It featured a mid-mounted engine and was meant to restore Bugatti to the racing glory of the 1920s. It failed completely. The Type 251 never won a single race. The car that was supposed to recapture past glory became an embarrassing symbol of how far the company had fallen. The company that had once averaged 14 victories per week couldn't manage one. They made one last appearance at the Paris Motor Show in 1952, then they gave up. In total, over 47 years, Bugatti had produced approximately 7,900 automobiles. That's fewer than Ford makes in a single day today. The company was eventually purchased in 1963, but the buyers weren't interested in cars. They wanted Bugatti's airplane parts business. The automobile production that Ettore had dedicated his life to was considered worthless. The factory at Molsheim sat abandoned. The racing trophies gathered dust. The name Bugatti became a legend, a memory, a story about what might have been. And somewhere out there, Jean Bugatti's personal Atlantic, the car he called La Voiture Noire, remains missing. This is one of the great mysteries of the automotive world. Jean had the second of the 4 Atlantics built for himself. He painted it black, giving it the name La Voiture Noire, French for the black car. He drove it regularly around Molsheim. Factory workers saw it often. It was documented. It was real. When war broke out, he presumably hid it somewhere to protect it from the Germans. Perhaps in a barn on a sympathetic farmer's property. Perhaps in a warehouse in the countryside. Perhaps bricked up inside a building, the way the family hid the unsold Royals. Perhaps somewhere so secret that nobody else knew the location. Jean died without telling anyone where the car was hidden. His father, consumed by grief and then by the war and the collaboration charges, apparently never found it. The car has never been recovered. Automotive historians have searched for decades. Investigators have followed every lead. Every few years, someone claims to have new information. Someone thinks they saw something in an old photograph. Someone remembers a story their grandfather told. The trails always go cold. Some believe the car was destroyed during the war, perhaps bombed in a building that took a direct hit, perhaps simply lost to time and decay. Others believe it still exists, hidden in some forgotten corner of France, waiting to be discovered. The car, if it still exists, would be worth well over $50 million today, possibly much more. The last Atlantic to sell at auction went for over $30 million, and that was the least desirable of the surviving 3. In 2019, to commemorate the 80th anniversary of Jean Bugatti's death, the modern Bugatti company unveiled a one-off hypercar called La Voiture Noire in tribute to the lost Atlantic. The car sold for approximately $19 million to an anonymous buyer. It was the most expensive new car ever sold, a tribute to a ghost. It's fitting somehow. A ghost car from a ghost company, built by a man who died too young, for a family that lost everything. The missing Atlantic is the perfect symbol for Bugatti itself. Something beautiful that vanished before its time. The Bugatti brand would eventually be revived. Multiple times, actually. The name was too valuable, too legendary, too evocative to stay dead forever. In 1987, an Italian entrepreneur named Romano Artioli bought the rights to the Bugatti name and founded a new company. Significantly, he based it not in Molsheim, but in Campo Galliano, near Modena in northern Italy, the heart of Italian supercar country, Ferrari and Lamborghini territory. Artioli was a true believer. He wanted to resurrect Bugatti as a builder of the world's finest automobiles, carrying on the tradition of Ettore and John. He hired engineers. He built a state-of-the-art factory. He invested millions. In 1991, on September 15th, what would have been Ettore Bugatti's 110th birthday, Artioli unveiled the EB 110 at a lavish ceremony in Paris. The car was spectacular. A mid-mounted 12-cylinder engine with 4 turbochargers, 4-wheel drive, around 550 horsepower, a top speed exceeding 210 miles per hour. It was one of the fastest cars ever built at that time. The EB 110 attracted celebrity buyers. Michael Schumacher owned one, so did several other racing drivers and wealthy collectors. About 140 cars were produced, but the company couldn't survive. The early 1990s recession hit hard. Sales fell short of projections. In 1995, Bugatti Automobili SPA went bankrupt. Artioli's dream had lasted less than a decade. The factory was shuttered, the equipment was sold, the brand went dormant again. Then came Volkswagen. In 1998, the German automotive giant acquired the rights to the Bugatti brand. Unlike Artioli, Volkswagen had essentially unlimited resources. They weren't hoping for success. They were going to engineer it. Volkswagen's chairman, Ferdinand Piëch, was himself a legendary figure in automotive engineering. His grandfather was Ferdinand Porsche. He had spent his career building faster, better, more technically advanced vehicles. He saw Bugatti as the ultimate challenge. Build the fastest production car in the world. Build the most luxurious. Build the best. They built a new factory in Molsheim, on the same grounds where Ettore had started over a century earlier. The factory was designed in the shape of Bugatti's signature horseshoe radiator, visible from the air. It was a fitting tribute, a symbolic link between the new company and its legendary past. In 2005, Volkswagen unveiled the Veyron, a car that shattered records and redefined what was possible. Over 1,000 horsepower from a quad-turbocharged W16 engine, a top speed exceeding 250 miles per hour, a sprint from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds, a price tag of over $1 million. The Veyron was followed by the Chiron, named after Louis Chiron, the legendary driver who had won so many races in Bugatti Type 35s decades earlier. The company continues to produce hypercars that push the boundaries of engineering and luxury. Today, there's a Bugatti factory back in Molsheim. There are Bugatti hypercars that sell for millions. The name lives on. But that's a different story. A corporate story about brand licensing and German engineering, and Volkswagen's quest for prestige. The real Bugatti, the one Ettore built with his bare hands and impossible standards, the one John was supposed to inherit, the one that won 2,000 races and built cars for kings, that Bugatti ended on a road near Duppigheim when a drunk cyclist wandered into the wrong lane. 14 race wins per week, 21-foot limousines for royalty, the most beautiful cars ever designed, the greatest racing dynasty of the early 20th century. And it all came down to one moment, one swerve, one tree. Ettore Bugatti once said, "Nothing is too beautiful, nothing is too expensive." In the end, the price was his son, his company, and his legacy. The artist who wanted to build machines more beautiful than his father's furniture succeeded beyond imagination, but beauty couldn't protect him from tragedy. Perfection couldn't save the dynasty. There's a plaque now on the road near Duppigheim, marking the spot where Jean Bugatti died. The old road has been rerouted because of the nearby Strasbourg airport, but if you know where to look, you can still find the place where the future of Bugatti ended on a summer evening in 1939. A cyclist who shouldn't have been there, a driver who chose to swerve, a tree that didn't move. Sometimes that's all it takes to destroy an empire. One random moment, one split-second decision, one drunk wandering onto a closed road at the wrong time. Ettore Bugatti spent his entire life trying to control every variable, every bolt aligned perfectly, every component machined to impossible tolerances, every car that left his factory a testament to human mastery over chaos. But you can't control everything. You can't engineer your way around fate. You can build the fastest cars in the world, win 2,000 races, create machines that will be worth $50 million a century later, and still lose everything to a cyclist who should have been somewhere else. That's the lesson of Bugatti. That's the tragedy. That's all it takes to destroy an empire.